Alright. So we've been on quite the trip together, but I'm glad to see that you're back. I think I'd like to dive right in this time. So as you find yourself back in this same feeling as you let the music roll over you, close your eyes and you let yourself in onto the story that's to be told. You find yourself once again in the world of beginnings. Grey, dark. A lot like the first time that you came here. Or what you feel like was the first time. You're not sure if you've been here before or not. It feels familiar, it feels like you've been here a lot, but also not. Strangely enough. It's quiet. Dark. A lot like the way it was the first time you got here. Buildings rise up beside you. The path goes endlessly ahead and behind you. And as you look around, you see several intersections. No people. Just for a moment, you think you see a shadow flit past down one of the intersections and off down a side street. But it's gone just as quickly as it came. You continue down your path for a few minutes, just walking, ambling, taking your time. And you find your way back to a familiar little ramshackle hut, made of dark wood, completely ashened and sooted up along the sides, with a door that's just slightly off its hinges, and with some cracks along the sides from which you can see, just faintly, the dancing lights of a fire. This time the door remains closed. As you approach, you open the door yourself. The other times you were always beckoned in, but this time you open it yourself and you purposefully stride in, sitting across the fire, as the previous times as well. You see Soren Lestrade, the middle-aged man, graying, beard, a little bit disheveled today. Kind of short cropped hair. Today just kind of sitting there in what looks like just kind of a brown cloak underneath. Looks like he has maybe jeans and a t-shirt. Sitting on a log, just kind of staring into the fire, warming his hands a little bit. Welcome back. I'm sorry about last week. Kind of had to take a quick break for, well, reasons, as he tilts his head out towards the sky, which is open. Take a seat. There's a few more logs around this time. And looking around, you can see they're, as usual, set in a circle around the fire. As if he was expecting more people this time. Or maybe not. Maybe he just wanted a bigger circle. Alright, sit down. We have places to go. I believe we have a story to finish. As he beckons you, and you close your eyes listening to his voice. Reopen them. The silence continues just as previously, but you're somewhere else now. Back in the forest of bottles. Back on the ground, with the inch-thick layer of water on top of it that you're just barely standing in, and hanging from the sky, from nowhere, from the void. Many, many hundreds of bottles. Huge, tiny, all sorts of sizes, further than you can see between them. The sensation from the last time also catches you again. The previous time, the bottles were all kind of shifted, until you realized that it wasn't the bottles that were shifted, but the ground, and the bottles were just hanging according to gravity the way you'd expect them to. Well, this time it's doing that again, but in a very, very much weirder way. The ground is a lot more crooked, but it looks flat to you, and you realize that it's not just crooked in one direction. Even though it looks flat, you realize that the ground must be curved because the bottles kind of hang in all sorts of strange angles. You hear a laugh behind you as Soren Lestrade comes up. Well, this place has seen better days. Maybe... Well, I think it'll get better again. I think it'll be okay again. Just leave it be for a bit and it'll be fine. So I think today we have one more appointment with a place that we know rather familiar by now. As he reaches out forward, and this time he doesn't grab the bottle, it just kind of floats and thump, magnetically connects to his hand as he grasps it and pulls it. And this time now you can see there's 3 lights within it, very densely packed on top of each other, on a little area of the map, just barely recognized by now as Noom. So our little rendezvous, I think, has one more event to take place. Would you like to do the honors? He says and hands you the bottle. It's kind of fun to do at this point. The first time it was really disconcerting, but now as you hold the bottle, it's nice to look into it and realize that's where you're going. To see where you're going to be landing is a pleasant and rather funny sensation. You uncork the bottle as the sensation hits you again of being pulled into the bottle. And for the briefest moment, seeing yourself standing outside the bottle and falling both at the same time. As you pass yourself by, and then it fades as around you the glass shimmers and becomes more of an atmosphere, just wide, goes off into the distances. And as you turn and you look down towards where you're falling once again, pulls you over, and you see the overlay of the map of Rumanara. And it stops you once again. This time you don't fall quite as quickly as Soren Lestrade kind of falls a bit beside you. And he says, "Take a good look at this place. I feel like, well, when we return here, maybe we'll go somewhere else. It is a big map after all. Maybe it'd be nice to go way out east. I think the elves have some very nice stories to tell. Or maybe south. Further south could be cool. Maybe in the far north. I know that's really harsh up there. I think there's many places this map has that have stories to tell and wonderful experiences to have. But for now," he says, and you feel yourself pulled stronger, falling towards this place on the map, extremely familiar by now, as you're falling towards Noom. And as you get within a closer area, you see as the map overlays over the verdant greens and the vivid blues, as you can see the map in these pastel colors, in this very faint, scrawled, as though the lines were made of charcoal, overlaid vividly into your vision as though you can see both at the same time. Both the map and the lands. In the lands you can see the hills, you can see the mountains, the lakes, the cities, villages. You see the forests and the pathways. And despite the fact that it's so far away, just very barely you can see the movement of the many, many, many denizens of this country. And then it falls. And the map stays, somewhere. As you focus, you find it again, but you can leave it, as you see fit. And you land closer to Macaron Rayla, then past it, and past it. You feel yourself soaring between the highlands, between the hills. So it brings you to a familiar place. A familiar scene of a battle. Brings you to familiar faces. A familiar situation. Within your mind, you can hear the voice of Soren Lestrade. So I believe as we last had it, I think Baeran, well, he had learned about the storm wind set, and he had gone home to forge it with steel using the Forge Master's notes. And as he had come back, as he had just arrived, the Dol Moroi had attacked. And so the battle commenced. And Baeran, wearing his steel armor, donned it, got his axe ready, joined the main strike force. And when the opportunity arose, he attacked, fought the false king of the Highlands, and perhaps temporarily defeated him. Asgard Morog dropped his weapon and fled, called the singular retreat. From that point, Baeran picked up the weapon. He felt as it coursed through his body, the power of it. He saw the runes on his arm, the wind runes that he had gotten originally from the whistling stones, from the stone flutes. And he saw them crackle with electricity. But underneath that, he could very faintly see this extremely dull, red, almost black line coursing through it and up his shoulder. And as he looked at his shoulder, he could see the runes continuing across the armor that he had, doing exactly the same, crackling with blue electric energy, with this very faint reddish black line going through each of them. For reasons he didn't know, he turned around and he found the remainder of the battlefield bowing to him, both the living and the dead. And as he turned towards the Thanes, much to his surprise, he found them bow to him too. And just briefly, from Lavi, one of the Thanes' lips, heard the title True King of the Highlands? Wasn't sure. He'd never heard of a true king. He had always figured that the dwarves of the Highlands had always been shattered the way they are now. He didn't know that this was a thing. And then as he stood there, his vision blacked, and above it, another set of eyes set upon him to see something. And he saw a historical battle with a dwarf he didn't recognize. And as that battle faded, and he watched the times pass in extreme speed, and he saw the lands weathered and then regrow, and then he saw himself fighting another battle right here where he stood. Not this one of much larger scale. And in the aftermath of the battle, he could see that whatever would happen would not be the same. It would not be the same as these ancient scars wrought upon the lands. They wouldn't live on, they wouldn't regrow. All that would remain is decay. The lands here would die, if he let that happen. And with that, Baeran blacked out. As we find him again, Baeran has been carried back to the outpost. As he awakes, he finds himself in the little hut that he had originally gotten when he came here. His small bag of things on the side. Still wearing his armor. And as he looks at it, it's still thrumming with this power that he's had the entire time. He still felt the power and the surge of whatever it was that caused him to succeed when he probably should have failed. For a moment he groaned and he stood up. He breathed a few times, winced a bit as he looked down and he saw his wounds had not been tended. He had several gashes and slashes, and part of his arm was cut. A few scrapes. Part of a minor burn that he wasn't sure where it came from, but took a few brief moments. Sat for himself. Wasn't in any danger. None of them were bad. They hurt. They'd probably need some tending to. But they were alright. He felt very alive at the moment. He got up, got his whistling axe and strapped it to his belt. Then he walked forward and he opened the door. And out in the sunlight he could see the Thanes standing in a semicircle around the doorway. He walked out and he for a moment he just looked around and they stood there. Same as when he originally met them, very defiant, very proud, very strong. And they didn't bow down this time, but they each nodded to him in turn. And then one of the others, an exceptionally tall dwarf with graying hair, looking somewhat older, beckoned to him and said, "Come. Baeran, we have many things to tell you. And judging from the way you look at us, I feel like there's many things you do not know yet. It is time." He let out his hand and began leading Baeran back to the longhouse, large area where he had originally met them. As he began walking, all of the Thanes waited. Only the tall one strode ahead of him, leading him onwards. And then as he looked behind him, he saw that the rest of the Thanes walked in single file behind him. Till eventually they reached the longhouse, and he walked inside. And he sat down where he had sat down the first time as well, across from the fireplace, across from the seats that the 6 Thanes had taken. So what is it that I'm missing? Do I recall correctly? What happened at the end of the battle? Why did he run? The tall one looked at him again. Well, perhaps we need to tell you the true stories. The stories of the dwarves before we came shattered as we are. Stories of the true king of the Highland. I am Thane Dolan, Thane of Dulthorek. The name didn't mean much to Baeran, this one. He'd never heard of that clan before. Figured it might have been from further north. My clan might not have been around when this originally happened. We are a tad newer, and as such, perhaps the other Thanes have more to tell you. But there is more to this than just telling you of an ancient history. You have gained a few titles, and yet they have not been acknowledged. So if you would stand. Baeran stood up. And Dolan came towards him, stood in front of him, and kneeled down to be on the right height. And as he began pulling Baeran's beard into place a bit, began knotting it in a very specific manner, kind of a Celtic knot. Just on one side, not all of it. I bestow upon you the first of your titles, Baeran Windtamer. Welcome to the Circle of Thanes. And he backed off. And the next came forward. A balding head, also fairly tall dwarf, surprisingly. Also really, really broad. Extremely big, in general. My name is Torbron. I am Thane of Dulnon-Tess. This one sounded more familiar to Baeran. This one was actually more of a southern clan. He had come in contact with them previously, and he knew they were a fairly warring sort, but they'd never had any issues with them. And Torbran came towards him. He took the other side of the beard and began nodding. Baeran, this nod is for your second title. Baeran the Kind, for what you have done to save another dwarf. As Torbran bows, finishes the second Celtic knot. A little bit different, a different intricacy than the first one, as they parallel and yet aren't quite the same. He bows and moves backward. This fairly standard looking fellow comes towards him. A very joyful looking face, strangely enough, with an extremely crooked nose that's probably been broken several times. My name is Yorvo. I am the Lord of Dalen Klyn. Klyn was a town, just off the other side of the Plains of Mord if you continued down the river past Macaron Rayla. As he moves towards him, and he moves in, and he starts nodding one on the left side, a little bit further inward. Baeran, this is for the third name that you have gotten. You are Baeran, the Steelsinger. We bow to you. He bows again and he moves backwards. Stands back. A fourth person comes forward. A really small, very gaunt, very thin dwarf. Didn't look like he had much battle. But much as dwarves look like that, they probably always have anyway. I am Wulg, Mayor of Dalen McInvo. You'd also heard of McInvo before. It was another town, further up the river from Macaron Rayla. All of these towns and settlements were along the edges of the Highlands and partway through them. You came towards them. Wulg took the right side of the beard. He did another intricate knot, saying, Baeran, this is for a name that you have earned as part of your clan. Baeran of the Dul Ulthari. You are Baeran Ulthor, holder of your name. We bow to you. As he bows, and he moves backward to stand with the other Thanes. Eventually, the fifth one comes forward. Lavi. He had met her before. She had explained things to him previously. A somewhat hunched, older dwarven woman. But nonetheless, despite that, extremely well-muscled. Powerful. Many scars along the forearms as far as he could tell, and he imagined probably all over everywhere, judging by it. I am Lavi, Thane of the Dul Karg. And this name was very familiar to you, to Baeran. The Dul Karg was the clan that attacked his once upon a time, shortly after he had been born. The one that forced him to move. And as he looked at Lavi, it was a mixture of confusion, and Baeran didn't entirely know what to make of it, but he felt she hadn't done anything to him on the previous times, and he felt no hostility this time either. Lavi came towards him, took the center of the beard, and she knotted the remainder of it, and parts of the other knots into it as well, into a larger braid and a larger knot before it hung down lower, and she said, Baeran, this is a title that none of us can grant you, but has been granted by another. By the goddess and by the first true king of the Highlands. You are Baeran, true king of the Highlands. We bow to you. And with this one, all of them bowed. Baeran still completely confused, absolutely no idea what was happening. What does this mean? There's a true king of the Highlands? Who is the true king of the Highlands? What is that even? And the last ones of the Thanes spoke up. Another woman. A female dwarf, very heavy set, extremely thick eyebrows, and the longer Baeran looked, the more he thought that those eyebrows, they held a secret. It was beautiful. He thought it was wonderful. It was the strangest feeling of falling in love for him. And as she spoke, it was the most perfectly gravelly harsh voice that he could have imagined. I am Flida, Mayoress of Dalen Rayla. And that surprised him for a moment, because he didn't figure that Makaran Rayla had taken part in this. He knew that Makaran Rayla was not entirely, but to a large point, dwarven. He knew that it was run by dwarves, but it surprised him that they would go out of their way to take part in this conflict. And it was as he was thinking that, Lita began to tell more of a story. In the archives of Makaran Rayla, there are many stories about the true kings of the Highlands, beginning with the one and only Durin, Acolyte of Ashtola. He is the one who forged the original Stormwind armor, and potentially he is the one who has bestowed the power to forge it within you. The Stormwind armor has always represented the true king. Only the true king can awaken it, only the true king can use it, and should he go against the things that make him a true king of the Highlands, then the armor will betray him. You are our leader. You are granted by Ashtola to show our people the way forward. We bow to you, and at this point, all of them bow onto one knee, lay their weapons forward in a sign of fealty. At this point, he sees them looking up at him in an expectant way, and the name Ashtola is very familiar to him. It is the one and only goddess of the dwarves. Which leads within the question, what does he do? He has been named King of the Highlands. But what should he do? Should he become a religious leader? Does he want to truly become king? Or does he want to leave it, find his family, and go his own path? What do you say? Yeah, this kind of determines a lot of what Baeran is. Does he become a priest? Does he become a lord? Or does he choose to wander? Decisions have to be made. Yep, you can choose. Does he want to take the path of a priest, the path of a lord, or does he want to take his own path? Alright, that's 2 votes for his own. I guess that's what we're going with. And as Baeran stands there, he looks at the circle of Thanes, and for a moment it's tempting. For a moment he knows that this means that the world has much more in store for him than he could possibly originally imagine. And as he thinks about it more and more, he realizes that he's not prepared for that. At least not yet. Eventually, maybe, he doesn't know. He saw a vision of decay. And he doesn't know how he got there. But the more he thinks about it, the more he realizes that he needs to learn more about it, about who he is, and what this responsibility means before he can choose a role like that. So he turns to the Thanes and he says, I hope you understand, but I am not prepared to take this position. I cannot lead you. I cannot lead you in battle. I cannot lead you in peace. I do not know how, and I'm sure you would be great advisors, but it is not something I can do. And so for now, at least, I will simply be Baeran. I will let Ashtola guide me. I will seek to find my family. And perhaps one day I will return to this conversation, to this choice, and see whether I make another one. Looking around, he sees some of the Thanes seem to have a bit of a glad expression. Some of them seem disappointed. He sees that Lavi has a bit of a recognition on her face. Dolan seems mostly indifferent. And with these many different responses, he looks back out at them and he says, I'm going to return to the field of the battle. I need to see the dead with my own eyes. If you wish to join me, you may. I do not intend to return here afterward. Not for a while, at least. And he bows to them. I thank you for all of your assistance. I thank you for your sacrifices. May we meet again. Bows, and he turns around and he leaves the hall. And the contrast between the outside air, fresh and wonderful since he realizes that it must be the next morning since the battle. It's clean, he can smell the dew. It smells fresh and it feels like a new beginning. And it's in such stark contrast from the longhouse, which has this smoky, enveloping sensation, to walk out into such freedom, in a way. He knew he had the option. And yet it felt right. It felt right to choose, for the time being, the freedom to find what he needs to find. With that, he packed up his stuff, found his bag, put it over. At this point, looking over at his armor and his arms, he finds that the dull red streak has remained. The electricity seems to have faded, and just barely visible next to these dull red streaks in the runes, you can also see the dull blue. Very faint light blue. The same one that he had seen when he was singing and when he was moving around the stone in the Plains of Mord. As he walks to return to the field, it doesn't take him long. It wasn't far away. And as he gets close, the weight of what happens falls upon him. He realizes, standing upon the hilltop, the amount of dead. Looking out, just many dwarves pulling the dead aside, preparing them for burial. Not just his own side. The army of the Thanes was also pulling the dwarves from the other side, from the fake king's army, to lay them to rest. No dwarf, friend or foe, deserved to be left outside to die, to waste away. And so he went down, and he walked between the dead, allowing the experience to last on him. And every now and then between the dead, as he would walk, he would find above them just remnants of their spirit that were fading. Mostly just already wisps, gone to the winds of the Highlands. But in some of the cases, just barely for a brief moment between the wisps and the falling apart of this tether, he could see a face of a dwarf, nameless dwarf, one that he didn't know and didn't recognize. Here and there, new figures, ones he had never seen, but respected for what they had done, for the fight they had fought, and the death they had had. And he'd bow to each one, and they'd bow back in return before. As he walked between the dead, he reached the point where the vanguard originally clashed. Theirs with the enemies. Here the armies hadn't cleaned up yet. Here everything was lying, not fresh, but just as it was when he had left originally. There were so many dead here. The vanguard had fought the longest. They'd hit each other the hardest. They were the opening gambit. And between the wisps, he saw a face of a ghost slowly vanishing. The first familiar face. And he recognized it as his father. And he ran and he sprinted over. And there, lying there, see the body of his father, and just somewhat further his sister lying next to his mother, as apparently at least his family. And looking around, he saw other members of the clan. He didn't see all of them, but he saw as they must have been part of the vanguard, compelled or bribed or forced into becoming part of the army. Baeran fell to his knees, just kind of sat there for a while. Streaks of tears just running down, but not particularly crying. Just the shock of the moment not really going through as he realized that the family that he had searched for, that he had done all this for, here it was in front of him, as he saw the kind eyes of his mother before, as she looked upon him, sorrow in her face, and he saw his sister, as she seemed to want to, her expression was of kindness, of wanting to be close to him. As he looked around, he saw his father still remaining just briefly, voicing something. He couldn't hear anything. The voices of the ghosts were immaterial. And as he tried reading the lips, but he didn't know. But he could see within the eyes sorrow, but also pride to a certain extent. Before also that ghost and faded. Baeran sat there for a while. He took his time. And then he began, alone, letting everybody else do their own things. Began pulling any members of the clan that he could find. First his parents and his sister. Then extended family and extended portions of the clan. He pulled them all aside. Created a mound. Dug up some ground. Placed wood within it and burnt it. Not the families, just the ground. And as the fires died down again, as he spent the entire day doing this and night began to roll in, after the wood had burnt away, and within this hole, this wide flat hole, he then placed his family on the ashes. And then with each of them, he laid their weapon. And then he buried them. He replaced the mound, packed the earth a little bit, made sure that, as large as it was, he made sure that the earth pulled just very slightly. And in front of them, he placed a stone, and he smashed it into the ground and hit it downward somewhat. Left it unmarked. And here he then took off the axe that he had made. He placed the Whispering Axe in front of it. Now, on second thought, he picked it up and wedged it into the bottom of the stone. Stuck there. Then he stood up, bowed one last time, let the tears dry a bit, and then turned and left, leaving an unmarked stone and his axe behind to show where they lay. For a moment he wasn't sure where to go yet. Took a moment to think about where he could learn best of what he needed to do. If he wanted a history of Durin, he felt like his best chance was to learn more about the Stormwind set, to learn more about the history of the dwarves of the Highlands, where they had come from, what they were. And thinking about that, he thought about the largest place that he would find that thing. So he packed his stuff and he made his way towards Talbara. He knew it was a long journey, to have to make several stops along the way. Probably wouldn't be the safest, but he needed to do it anyway. He could check in McCarran Rayla. He probably would have found many things, but he didn't feel right about McCarran Rayla anymore. He needed to go further. He needed to leave the Highlands entirely. And for many days he traveled. It wasn't a particularly interesting travel, and each day and each night he felt haunted by the things that had happened. As each night the sorrow would catch up with him. And then through the fitful sleep every morning he'd wake up to the sunlight, and despite such beautiful days, although sometimes rainy and sometimes just scorching, no matter the day, it felt as though he never had as much energy as he wished he had. But he trudged on. Even if after most of the day he felt like he couldn't move anymore, he'd force himself to continue. Keep walking. Keep moving. And eventually, after many, many days, he had lost count. It didn't matter. He looked forward, and he began seeing the outskirts of a town, and beyond the town a village. Beyond the village, this seemed to be the outer portions of Talbara, as he could see just the thousands and thousands of chimneys doing small portions of smoke into the air, and beyond that he could see stone houses and the outline, the castle of Talbara. And he walked, and around nightfall he arrived then at the outskirts, not within fully. So he packed up his things, and he stayed in a small inn along the side. A dwarven lady gave him some room and board. It seemed like an inn, but it was hard to tell. Kind of just got a bed in a broom closet, it felt like. But it was cheap, and it didn't seem to bother him too much. And there he slept, but it wasn't any better than any of the other days. He felt like with each day it should have gotten better, but it wasn't. It wasn't getting worse either, it just didn't leave. It just was. Didn't know if he could get rid of the sorrow again. But as he got up the next morning, stood up, he walked out the front door, his pack and his armor on. Looking forward, he was now closer, and previously it wasn't as easy for him to see, but now standing closer, the majesty of this city was spectacular. He hadn't realized it the previous day, but just for for a few minutes it took his mind off everything that he had been thinking of. He had been to Makaran Rayla, but Makaran Rayla it was by all rights a large city, but it was built just like any of the dwarven settlements that he had been to. They were all these short, stout, long, large houses. No building really went above maybe 10 meters. And here he was looking forward, and he saw on a hill, or potentially even a small mountain, he saw this construction of stone and wood reaching up into the sky as he saw the castle of Talborough. A lot of the buildings were still small and stout in a lot of ways, and as he looked around, even though many weren't dwarven, and there were some humans, a lot of the people living here were small as well. There were many dwarves, but just as much there were many goblins, and there were gnomes, smaller folk in general. And then every now and then between them he'd see shuffling a giant figure, maybe or giant to him at least 3 times his size. Large, brutish figures, as he'd heard about these, and he figured he'd seen one in Makaran Rayla once upon a time, but he wasn't sure, as this was an ogre. Not particularly smart, but creatures, but still civilized in a lot of ways. And as the ogre walked past him, just and looked around, and the wonder took over for a while. And while every now and then these pangs of thoughts came back over the day, for most of it stayed away, as the amazement of this new place that he had just come to just overshadowed everything. Wasn't even sure where he was supposed to look. He didn't know what he was looking for. A history of some kind, maybe? And as he was walking around, eventually he found something interesting. It was a building unlike any he had seen before. It was completely made of stone, which was new to him. It was this beautiful structured building with carvings all over all of the walls, as it came upward in these flat walls and then peaked slightly. Just this very flat peak with these massive opened double doors made from some dark oak wood strapped with iron bolted to be able to close. And as the these small stairs, just a few of them led up to this entrance, he walked up, and looking inside was a strange smell he'd never encountered before. It smelled musty. It was extremely dark inside. Yeah, musty. It smelled like the office portion, or the attic that his father, the forge master, had kept a lot of his just manuscripts and pieces in when he had forged something and he wanted to keep track of it, and he'd scroll it down on charcoal, and he'd place it away in piles of paper. That's what this place smelled like, but so much more so. And didn't know what pulled him. He felt like he had the time to check. Didn't really know where he was going anyway, so he walked in. And as his eyes slowly adjusted, well, for a moment, first of all, the spell was intense, as this musty sensation, this smell that felt to him incredibly ancient, just overwhelmed him. And as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he could see many wall-like structures. You could tell that they were all shelves with journals on them, books of some sort. He'd never seen this many in one place. He only knew the few journals that his clan had kept, which he had one of them with him. And this place, it was completely loaded with them, as there were bookshelves that reached 30-40 meters into the air on all sorts of sides and going through the hallways. And even though this building was so large from the outside, as he looked inside, it was still tall, but there were so many narrow pathways between the shelves. At the front you could see several tables where a few people were sitting, and there were many people walking around looking at things. Many of them were taller than him. This was rather disconcerting to him. He didn't like too many people being that much taller than him. He didn't mind it too much, but they were a lot taller. His stout 1 meter 39 did not help him here. As he walked forward, looking around, he didn't know why he was here. And a person came up to him, a human man, thin, at least by Baeran's comparison. Kind of shaggy, a little bit younger by human standards, seemed like he had only maybe barely come of age, Baeran thought. He wasn't sure. He didn't know how humans worked. "Can I help you, sir?" The human asked. I don't know. What is this place? Where am I? What is this? Well, this is the library. You come here to learn things. To read? To find something? Is that not why you're here? Baeran just kind of looked at the human. And the human just kind of looked back at him. And each of them was equally confused about this turn of events. You say this is a place of learning? And the human looked back to me. Yes, well, you can ask me. I can show you where you'll need to find the books so that you can learn what you need. Can you even read? At this point, Baeran was a little bit insulted. He said, "Of course I can read. I think. Yeah, I think I can read." The human looked ever more perplexed and suspicious at this point. "Well, we can try, but I'm keeping an eye on you. So what are you looking for?" Baeran thought for a moment. "Well, I'm looking for information on Dwarven history and on Durin." And the human looked at him and he's like, "Can you be a bit more specific? Okay, just follow me, we'll find whatever you need." And he took Baeran, and as they walked down many of the shelves and past many of the things, and then eventually they came to a shelf, and he said, "Alright, well, this is Dwarven history." And Baeran looked over and he said, "You mean these books here?" And the human looked back at him. He said, No, these books." As he stretches out his arm and shows the entire wall, essentially. "There's a lot of Dwarven history. I don't know what you're looking for. There's a lot of it. Maybe you can be more specific." Baeran thought for a moment longer. "Well, I want to learn about Dwarven history in regards to Ashtola, the goddess." Human looked at him and he's like, "Of course you mean the goddess, and you do realize that, like, all of Dwarven history has to do with the goddess, right?" This is gonna be frustrating. As the human turns around and he gets a, like, ladder thing from the side and, like, scooches it up so that he can climb up the wall a bit further. Alright, we'll start with some sensible stuff. As he climbs it up a bit and he gets up this huge book and he places it down on the small table that line of which there's many that line these bookshelves. So this is just a general history of dwarves. It's got a lot of info, but it's probably not as detailed as you'll need, maybe. Then there's this, and he gets another book. "This is every legend according to Ashtola." He places these books, and they're each easily wider than Baeran's biceps, which is saying something. And this, as he gets out another huge book, even larger than the other two. That is Dwarven history of the Highlands. There's a lot of it, because I don't know why you all write down way too much, and then it all comes together, and then there's just this mess. Read through them, find out what you're trying to find. If you need more, I'll be over there. I've got some things to sort. As the human walks down the aisle a little bit further and to the side, and then begins moving this little wagon or something of the sort to replace some of the things. And Baeran just kind of looks at the books and he's like, "What do I do with this? Like, the journal of my father was like this broad. It had maybe 50 pages in it, and then he looks at these books and they each have maybe 500, maybe more. They're these huge pieces. And as he opens one of them, all of the books written by all of the journals and things written by his father and by the other Forge Masters were all handwritten. And as he looks in this one, he sees the writing is tiny. Some of it is handwritten, but extremely small writing. Some of it seems to be too uniform for that. Never seen any writing of the sort. And as he looks at it more and more, he sees repeating portions of it. It looks like instead of writing, somebody just kind of... He didn't know how it was done. It looked too identical. He'd never seen any writing like that. So he took his time, and he began reading just the first book about the history of dwarves in general, and as he began reading the first book, he realized it had a lot to do with mountain dwarves. And he didn't like that very much, so he just passed over the entire portion of the mountain dwarves until he reached like 2/3 through the book, and eventually it was like, and there was this segment saying, and this is the point at which the dwarves moved to Noom, and the mountain dwarves moved into the bottom of Troftengard, and then it continued on this massive explanation of the dwarves of Troftengard and how they then expanded through the mountains, and there was absolutely nothing about hill dwarves that he was looking for. And then and so at this point, having just kind of leafed through what felt like a million pages, he felt very frustrated and closed it and put to the side. He had no idea how much time had passed. It didn't matter that much either. Just placed it there, took the next book. Which was more of a history on the Highlands, and as he opened it, this looked a lot more familiar. Huge as it was, he could tell that this was a lot more what he was used to. It was all handwritten, it was all a lot larger, and as he looked through it, it was a lot of different styles of writing. Some of it looked older, some of it was runic in a way that he didn't quite recognize. He could read it in portions, but he could tell that whoever wrote it was lost to the ages. And he could also tell that, old as some of the pages were, and he tried being as careful as he was, he tried to be as quiet as possible as well, because he accidentally ripped a page. And he just kind of placed it together, and he looked up and he listened around trying to see if the human was anywhere close to him, the librarian. And as nothing happened, he kind of relaxed a bit more, and then went back to reading, being a little bit more careful not to rip the pages. And going through them, you could see that most of them were just single pages that were leafed together and bound in somehow, instead of being an actual book put together like the journals or the book that he had just read. So he went through them and he found a lot of things about a lot of different clans, and partway through he found small pieces by Forge Masters of old. Not about forging, none of that was in here, not in this one at least, but about the Dual Thari clan and small bits and pieces of history, where they had come from, where they had settled. And much to his excitement, and rather interesting to Baeran, we found that the Dual Thari had been pretty much everywhere in the Highlands. They just kind of moved around it, just going wherever they needed to go, and at times they were larger, sometimes they were smaller. From what he could tell from the text, seemed to be one of the smaller points during their history. Eventually he closed the book, and he looked up. He took a moment, and as he looked up, he saw a figure standing there. No idea how long they'd been standing there. He didn't notice them come up. This extremely dark-skinned woman. Reasonably taller than him, but not by a lot. As she had this rather dark purplish skin. These leather tunics on in a variety of greens, it looked like. At least within this dimness, it looked like green. And this jet black hair. And with the sleeves rolled up, he could see on her extreme amounts of tattoos and scrawlings across both of her arms. Hung at both sides were these pretty massive books to be carrying around. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. She just kind of smiled at him and just continued staring there. And he looked up at me, he's like, "Can I help you? Do you need something?" You look down and she just, no, continue. She just continued standing there. And he just continued looking up. Put the book aside. Really, can I help you? What do you need? This is kind of strange. Who are you? I don't need anything. Just find it fascinating. You don't look like you've been here too often. Alright, my name is Lurian Brightspire. You look to be looking for interesting things. Maybe I can help you. Baeran looked up at her. I don't know if you can help me. The human person from over there helped me. He found these books for me, and Lurian looked at him. Oh, he's not going to help you. Look at those books. Have those helped you so far? Did you find anything, really? Baeran felt a bit flustered at this point. A little bit. I found some things. Were they helpful to you? Maybe? Oh boy. What's your name? As said, I'm Lurian. My name's Baeran. Very good, Baeran. So, you're looking for something. You don't know what you're looking for. You think that whatever is in here has helped you, but it probably really hasn't because... Look at me, I know what I'm talking about. So, maybe I can help you find what you need to know. I like those things on your arm, by the way. They're really pretty. As Baeran kind of takes the moment and then he kind of like hides it, and Lurian laughs at him and says, you do realize that whatever's on your arm is also all over your armor, so I really don't need to see your arm to be able to, you know, recognize any of that. That's ancient Dwarvish, isn't it? Baeran looked at her, and with every passing moment, this figure standing in front of him was ever more confusing. He just really genuinely didn't know what to do with this person. Can you read these? Do you know what these mean? Lurian looked at him and said, well, I think I can. I've read them before. She picks out a book, and as she opens it and as Baeran looks inside for the briefest moment before she pulls it out of his gaze, he sees just these scrawlings of circles and sigils and pieces and text in this cursive that is, at least for the brief moment that he saw it, absolutely impossible for him to read. She hovers her hand over it. And this brief lightning flash effect comes from out of the book, reaches up her hand, spirals up her arm, and then until it reaches her eyes, and her eyes are flashing very slightly with this little bit of a lightning crackling effect around them. Alright, now I can read it. So, let me look at that as she leans in closer, looking at the armor. Well, give me your arm, give me your arm. It's probably easier to read than whatever this mangly bit of metal is. Pulls his arm forward. Well... Ooh, isn't this fascinating? Well, that's really cool. Where'd you find this? She, like, kind of pulls his arm and, like, pulls it a little bit. She's not strong enough to pull it out of his socket or anything, but it's like, this is really uncomfortable. What are you doing? Eventually she pulls it down, looks at it a bit more. These are fascinating. I think I've seen these before. This is like some... This is like some... Well, it's like a runic poem about the wind. That's super cool. I feel like I've read this before. She just kind of stands there, and Baeran just leaves his arm where it is, currently in her hands. And then seconds pass, and moments pass, and then minutes pass, and Baeran's just kind of sitting there. Lurian? Eventually she's like, oh my god, shut up, I'm trying to think of something. Be quiet. And then she stands and continues into exactly the same pose she was beforehand. Takes a moment. Eventually, after what feels like forever, several, like, probably half an hour passes. Eventually Lurian's like, that's right, that's where I had that. Huh. Well, I know where to find it. If you want to, you can come with me, we can go find it together. Do you want to go there? I don't know what you're looking for. Baeran just... Okay, hold on. Take a moment. What are you talking about? Lurian stops for a moment. Okay, so, I remembered this. I had this once when I was studying. Like, I remember this poem. This is, like, part of an Edda, and I remember there's more portions to it, but I don't remember exactly how they went. But there was a portion there was like fire, lightning, rain. There was a portion about the goddess Ashtola, and there was a bit about splitting a set of armor, I think. I'd have to read it again. I think I know where I can find it. At this point, Baeran's completely hooked. Wait, so where do I find this? Where is this? Well, that depends. I mean, where I found it was way off in Leandar, and the name told Baeran nothing, as he looks confused. Oh boy, you're a bumpkin, aren't you? You've never been anywhere, have you? Oh boy. Okay, well, if we go from Talborough to Keneal, and then we take the trip from Keneal across and we reach the mountains on the other side of that little lake thing, and then we go east from there, well, there's this massive big-ass lake. And within that lake, there is a giant floating city, made of lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of really cool floating towers, actually. A bunch of bridges going between them. It looks really cool. It's very different from anything that you're used to, probably. That's where we'd go. Baeran is completely out of his league at this point. Wait, so we're going to Keneal? We're going to... What do you mean? Why do I have to go there? Well, that's where I found the poem book, right? You wanted this thing on your arm. Look, either you can go to Keneal with me, and we can go then travel across the lake, and then we go to Leandar, and it'll be great. But if you don't want to do that, I mean, you can stay here too. I can help you with a few of these books, and then you can find whatever you're looking for. And now Baeran wasn't entirely sure. So, should Baeran join Lurien Brightspire and travel to Leandar, wherever that might be? Or should he stay here, try searching through the library a bit more and find more about dwarven pasts? And about the history of Durin, maybe what that means. So, what should he do? So the choices are, he can either go with this strange woman that he's found to Leandar, which is outside of Noom, somewhere where he doesn't know, or he can stay here in the library, get a bit of help, and learn more about Dwarven history. Let's become travel friends. Should have known that somebody would just become travel friends for the sake of it. Okay, travel friends? Or we're doing travel friends. So Baeran looks up. Okay, well, okay, we're gonna do this. And Lurien looks up and looks down towards him and says, "You're just as crazy as I am. I love it. That's great. Be careful that you don't die on the way. It'll be fine." Baeran's like taken aback for a moment. It's like, why would I die? And she's like, I don't know. Things happen. Never know. Let's go. And she pulls him up, places the books to the side, and he's like, should we put those books away? And she's like, it's fine. And she lifts his hand, and she lifts her hand, waves it around a bit, and as he looks back, he sees as the books are just kind of float upwards and shift themselves back into the bookcase on their own. It's like, how do you do that? What is that even? He's like, well, that's magic. I can do a lot of things. There's like this thing with the eyes they're still sparkly and zapping. That's also magic. I do magic. It's a lot of fun. I mean, that kind of thing on your arm, that's magic too, you know? As he looks down. But this is dwarven magic, right? And as Lurien looks at him, she stops for a moment and says, I mean, yes, but also no? Kind of, I guess? You can call it that if you want to. And she begins striding forward, and Baeran, for a moment, is taken aback by how quickly she walks. And he shoulders his things, and he's like, he sees the human on the other side, and he says, alright, thank you, I think that's enough, I'm off here, goodbye. And the human just looks back at him, perplexed. Alright, goodbye, I hope you found what you were looking for. Baeran kind of calls around the corner, says, nope, and walks out the door. And as briefly as Baeran has now been in Tolborough, he immediately finds himself just leaving again. And he watches as Lurien takes him over and leads him over down into a bit of a side alley. And as it gets darker, as it gets darker down the sides because of the walls that go upwards, he finds himself in a situation he wasn't expecting. He was like, okay, we're gonna do something cool, and then he finds himself with a stranger in an alleyway. And then he looks around and he can't find her anymore. And he's like, this was a bad idea. I should have just stayed. I should have just stayed. I should have just stayed. He looks around, and then he sees her wandering around the corner again. He's like, where'd you go? What is this? As he slowly readies himself, getting out, like, a dagger, and she's like, please don't be like that. I'm not doing anything. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Like, it's not like you can hurt me with that thing anyway. And he's like holding it out in front of him, and he's like, I've done a lot of things with a dagger. I'm sure I can hurt you. And she's like, no, you can't. As she snaps and the dagger just vanishes. And it's just gone. And he's like, what'd you do? She's like, it's still there, as he hears a clattering sound, and he apparently let it fall onto the ground. It's a lot of fun letting things turn invisible in people's hands. She snaps and it reappears. It's like, please don't do that. You're really scary. He picks it up and he just kind of holds it in front of him. And he's like, are you going to do this again? Just put it away. I'm not going to do anything to you. It's fine. What we're going to do is, well, I suppose I could let you have a choice in this matter. Do you want to go the slow way? You know, travel to Keneal and then take a boat across and then wander over? Or do you want to do this the fun way? Baeran thinks for a moment. Looking at this person, he doesn't know what it means. What does the fun way mean? So what do you people say? Does he do the... Okay, he's doing the fun way? Okay, he's doing the fun way. Baron's like, what does the fun way mean? What do you mean with fun way? He's like, ooh, it's great stuff. Magic is fun, a lot of the time. I mean, we could walk to Keneal and then take the ship, as said, but one, that would cost money, and two, that'd be really boring. Or we can do this, as she holds up, and he looks, and it looks like a piece of white charcoal. So this is chalk, and with this thing I can do wonderful, wonderful things. She begins drawing on the ground. And it looks, well, at least to him, it looks briefly like the weird circular sigil thingamabobber that I'd seen in the book that she had. She gets that out again, and she opens to a different page, and she continues scrawling. Alright, Baeran, I'm going to need you to stand in the middle of this thing. Like, right here. Come over here. Yeah, right there. That's good. Just stay there. And then she turns around. Alright, with this line, things are going to be great in a sec. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. And she closes the line, the last line, and the white chalk that she drew on the ground flares up in this red. As for a moment he's like, what about it? This is fun! As he can't complete the sentence because he feels himself, like, plastered together, smooshed into this tiny piece, unable to breathe for the briefest moment, as he feels like he's being pulled through what feels like a plastic tube that's way too small for him. With this suctioning feeling, he's then suddenly standing again. And he just remains there for a moment. He looks around, and Lurien's standing there. On the ground, he can just barely see the remnants of the same circle. But around him, things are very different suddenly. He's not in town anymore. There's no more alleyway. Ahead of him, he can see a bunch of mountains reaching up. And Lurien's like, alright, that's fun stuff, sure, but turn around. And Baeran turns around, and at first he sees the edge of a lake. And then at the edge of the lake, he's a waterfall. This massive waterfall that goes down, circular within the center of the lake. This huge thing that goes to the very edge of his perception, and floating in the center, with waterfalls all around, is what Lurien had described, but much more majestic than anything that he had possibly imagined when she had said that. This floating structure made of thousands of towers, just connected in various different ways and constructions together, just floating in the center of this pit. At eye level, as he sees, it is in front of him, and underneath it just goes into this white void where the spray of the waterfalls hits something, maybe? He's not sure. It just goes down. He sees no bottom to the waterfalls, and within just this space in between the circular waterfall going around it is this floating city. He sees no way to get to it. It's just there. And he turns to Lurien. Lurien looks at him and says, "This is Leandar. Welcome to Leandar. This is gonna be a lot of fun." And with that ends the last portion of the segment of Baeran's travels, as Baeran gets a new name. Baeran the Wanderer. I hope you all had fun. It was pretty great stuff. As we will end the first part of the Saga of Names with Baeran having reached the first city outside of Noom, way outside his comfort zone, and way far from anything that he knows. So, to add to it, because something we like adding, so Baeran now has a lot of names, and the ones that he could have gotten today, well, the one he got was Baeran the Wanderer, and the other ones that he could have gotten were Baeran the Pilgrim, Baeran the Tyrant, or Baeran the Cowardly.